The Walkinstown Roundabout in Dublin 12, where 6 arterial routes converge to create a scene of controlled chaos, strikes fear into the heart of those learning to drive in Dublin City. But did you know that there once stood a 19th century cottage in the middle of all this clamour that became the stage for a 21-year standoff between one man and Dublin County Council that would culminate in hundreds of people, some armed with pitchforks, taking to the streets to protect his elderly owner from the county sheriff and his eviction order. Like its close neighbour Crumlin, Walkinstown witnessed a frenzy of suburban development that, beginning in the 1930s, had transformed a formerly peaceful and rural area of South Dublin into a bustling new home for thousands of people, many of whom had moved out of the city centre and away from its poor living conditions. Along with an increasing population came a surge in car ownership, and the familiar sight of dairy cows in the green fields of Walkinstown were replaced by Ford Anglias, Minis and Morris Minors, converging on what was then known as Walkinstown Cross. As Dublin Council made plans for a new roundabout and roads to try and deal with the constantly increasing traffic, little did they know that one man would stand in their way and refuse to allow his family cottage to fall victim to the wrecking ball of progress. This is the story of a man named Michael Chicken Cullen, who stood up to the county sheriffs and county council as they repeatedly tried to evict him, and stayed firmly put as his little rural cottage became surrounded on all sides by one of the busiest junctions in an ever-expanding Dublin city. Before we get going, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are lots more stories like this from Dublin's past on the way. To understand how this story began, we need to travel back in time to the mid-1800s, and a period before Walkinstown was even known by that name. Originally called Wilkinstown after a tenant farmer named Wilkins who lived in the area as far back as the 16th century, this was a sparsely populated area that was dominated by agriculture. It was here that a Wicklow man named Thomas Cullen decided to settle, work on local farms, and raise his family with his wife Jane. Thomas eventually became a head farm steward, and in 1865, his employer James Keogh built him a little cottage on a crossroads where Cromwellsford Road met Wilkinstown Road, Ballymount Road and Green Hills Road. Thomas and Jane had 7 children, including our hero Michael in 1886 and his sister Dorothy, known as Dolly, a few years later. Michael and his brothers became farm and railway labourers, while the sisters worked as dressmakers. Michael was the youngest son of Thomas, but despite this, he inherited the family cottage and lived happily and peacefully on the crossroads with his sister Dolly, while working hard for local farmers and landowners, such as well-known character and joker Willie the Bird Flanagan. Flanagan, a prominent landowner in the area, became renowned in Dublin for his outrageous antics, which included riding his horse into the bar of the Gresham Hotel and demanding the horse be served a drink. The Bird Flanagan lived in Walkinstown House that was demolished in the 70s to make way for Superquinn and now SuperValue on the Walkinstown Road. Michael never ventured far from his family home. He toiled in the fields and quarries of Walkinstown and Green Hills and played with the Crumlin fife and pipe band in his spare time, and could sometimes be seen enjoying a quiet pint in the halfway house. As Father Time and a life of hard labour began to creep up on him, he took solace in his little cottage and watched from the front door as his familiar fields and green lanes slowly disappeared before his eyes beneath a layer of concrete. Unbeknownst to Michael, by 1950, lines were already being drawn over his cottage on the work desks of the city planners in Dublin Council. It was decided that a huge new roundabout was the solution to the area's traffic problems, and the destruction of this old man's home was a price the planners were happy to pay. His peaceful life in Walkinstown was about to be turned upside down as a compulsory purchase order arrived on his doorstep and a 21-year standoff began. A warrant for possession of the house had been given to the county sheriff for execution, but Michael had no interest in moving from his home, and the paltry amount of £1,050 and a caravan offered by the council was nothing less than an insult. He told a local reporter, "What would a man of my years be doing in something as flimsy as a caravan?" So there he stayed as the road building works began around him. The road layout was altered, new roads constructed, and traffic began to whiz by the little whitewashed cottage that now stood on an island on all sides. But Michael was not for moving. The council were determined to see their plans come to fruition and tried time and again to convince the old man to move, but work on their grand new roundabout came to a full stop. The initial offer of just £1,050 had been fixed by the council, meaning he could not even appeal the amount in a court of law. As time passed, the council grew frustrated with the impasse and decided to build Michael, who was now living alone following the death of his sister Dolly, a new house within eyeshot of his cottage at the top of Walkinstown Avenue. The modern two-bedroom bungalow might have seemed like an attractive offer compared to Michael's century-old workers' cottage, but there was one major fly in the ointment. The council expected Michael to become a tenant and pay a token rent of £6 per week, meaning he would never own the house. This was a major issue for Michael, who saw no reason why he should begin to pay rent when he owned his cottage outright. He had inherited the cottage from his parents and intended to pass it on to his nephew upon his death, so accepting the council's offer would seriously diminish his estate. For him, the only acceptable offer was full ownership of the new bungalow. "This is a free country," he stated. "Surely a man can call his home his own." Michael's predicament began to attract the attention of the press, and the people of Walkinstown and Crumlin were determined to protect him from the sheriff's visits. In 1970, a journalist described the situation as follows: "Walkinstown's man in the middle, 84-year-old Michael Cullen, said today that he may not move out of his whitewashed cottage to a new house offered to him by Dublin County Council less than 200 yards away. For years, the Walkinstown bachelor who lives alone has refused to move from his family home to allow a major road project for Walkinstown to be completed. He told the reporter, 'I will stay here until I die if the conditions are not right. This house here is freehold, and unless the same applies to the one they are giving me, I will not move.' Pointing to the half-constructed roundabout, he said, 'That will never be completed in my time if I don't like the new house. When I was a boy, there was not one of these houses here. Ours was the only house in the district. The noise doesn't bother me anymore. My old ears aren't what they used to be.' By 1971, Dublin County Council had reached the end of their tether and decided to mount one final eviction attempt. However, word of their plans quickly spread through Walkinstown, and a group of 500 locals, some of whom were armed with pitchforks and shovels, rushed to the cottage to repel their advance. Michael and a small group of his closest allies barricaded themselves inside the cottage and waited to see the council's next move. The Gardaí arrived on the scene and attempted to disperse the angry crowd, while Councillor Larry McMahon pleaded with the county sheriff, Mr. Desmond Moran, not to execute the eviction order for fear that a full-scale riot would erupt. The now divided Dublin County Council were forced to back down. Over 100 people remained on guard duty at the cottage throughout the night and the following morning, as they feared the sheriff would mount another eviction attempt. From behind the barricade, TD Joe Dowling told reporters that the dispute involved a question of justice. The sheriff returned repeatedly to try and take possession of Michael's cottage, but he and the good people of Walkinstown stood their ground and were victorious. Michael Cullen was certainly no chicken. It was now clear to the council that Michael was never going to move unless his demands were met, and this is eventually what happened one night in 1971. He and a group of his friends quietly moved all his belongings a short distance across the road, where he turned the key in the door and took possession of his new home. As he prepared to spend his first night in the bungalow on Walkinstown Avenue, the peace of the night was broken by the sound of several diesel engines roaring to life. A crew of workers from the County Council had been watching from the shadows, and they quickly moved in to destroy the cottage to make sure he could not return. Michael Chicken Cullen lived out his days in his new bungalow until his eventual passing at the age of 95. At first glance, it is difficult to place where exactly the cottage once stood, but luckily some old photographs survive that provide a clue. At the gable end of the house, an old sewer vent is visible, and maps of the area show that the cottage stood at the top of Cromwellsford Road. Amazingly, the vent is still standing today on the roundabout, so that places the cottage to the right of the vent and stretching out into the busy lanes of the roundabout close to Cromwellsford Road. Michael's new cottage stood at the top of Walkinstown Avenue, but on the day that I filmed this video, it too was being demolished to make way for a new development. The next time you brave the Walkinstown Roundabout, spare a thought for Michael Chicken Cullen and his beloved family cottage that was once surrounded by the green pastures and dairy cattle of the Walkinstown of old.